B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Wednesday, May 22nd, 2019. Our stable genius president threw a hissy fit. The narcissism is overpowering. As he stalked out of a meeting with congressional leaders that was supposed to lead to a bipartisan agreement on infrastructure repair here in the crumbling United States. But Donald's ego crumbled first. And this is a scene that really could be pivotal, because Nancy Pelosi had just come from a meeting with congressional Democrats where she once again tried to tamp down the fires around impeachment of Donald Trump. And to mollify those who are demanding that an inquiry into impeachment begin right now, she made a public statement accusing Trump of running a cover-up, which is a pretty safe comment to make. And then she sallied over to the White House, sat down in the cabinet room with Chuck Schumer and other leaders from the House and the Senate, only to have Trump put on this emotional and angry display. The New York Times report says that Trump was loaded for bear. He walked into the cabinet room, didn't shake anyone's hand or sit in his seat. He said he wanted to advance legislation on infrastructure, trade, and other matters, but Pelosi had said something terrible by accusing him of a cover-up. And after just 3 minutes, he left the room before anyone else could speak. He stalked out to the Rose Garden where the media were waiting for him. There was a lectern with a White House-produced sign that said, "No collusion, no obstruction." And Trump told those reporters, instead of walking in happily into a meeting, I walk in to look at people that have just said that I was doing a cover-up. I don't do cover-ups, Trump said. I walked into the room and I told Senator Schumer, Speaker Pelosi, I want to do infrastructure. I want to do it more than you want to do it. I'd be really good at that. That's what... I'm sorry. This man is so predictable. Everything is about him. As if he's going to go out and run a bulldozer and, a concrete mixer and build all this stuff himself. Anyway, I digress. Continuing to quote his stable geniusness, but you know what? You can't do it under these circumstances. So get these phony investigations over with. And he's essentially saying that Congress will not get down to any business with him as long as he is being investigated. Now, we know that because he's stonewalling these same investigations, that they're not going to be over anytime soon. He wants this battle. He is daring the Democrats to impeach him. And I think they dare not impeach him. So Pelosi said he just took a pass, and it makes me wonder why he did that. In any event, I pray for the president. I pray for the United States of America. And then Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, expressing shock at the outcome, what happened in the White House would make your jaw drop. He suggested the real reason that Trump blew up was that he hadn't come up with a way to pay for such an enormous spending package, and therefore was looking for other excuses. I'm not so sure about this. Trump doesn't care about how things get paid for. He doesn't care about the deficit. He blew it up to fund the corporate tax cuts, and he has never looked back. He bragged during the 2016 campaign that he's a debt guy. He loves debt. Anyway, Schumer continued, hello. There were investigations going on 3 weeks ago when we met, and he still met with us. But now, when he was forced to say how he would pay for it, he ran away, and he came up with this pre-planned excuse. Now, it's fair to say he demonstrated really thin skin today. And as he went to the Rose Garden, he again claimed vindication by the Mueller report, accused Democrats of refusing to accept that he did nothing wrong. He vowed to defy all subpoenas for testimony and documents sought by the House. That's what an innocent person would do, which has angered enough Democrats that pressure is building to open a formal impeachment inquiry. And the Democrats are now parsing the terms very carefully. And I heard Jamie Raskin on television last night. He's a congressman from Maryland, I believe, and he's a law professor. And he said, well, we don't necessarily need to start impeachment proceedings in the House. We need to start an impeachment inquiry. Now, I don't see what the point is to trying to tiptoe. And you got Br'er Rabbit over here, in the thorn patch or whatever that was, the briar patch. And he's saying, don't impeach me, don't impeach me. And then he makes every effort to produce the kind of reaction that would lead to impeachment. Now, I do understand the political calculation here. Trump thinks that impeachment will help him unify his base and advance his claim of being the victim of witch hunts. And Democrats are afraid of that. But I believe that, as you've heard over and over again, there is no real choice here. His law-breaking, his obstruction, yes, his cover-ups, require that Congress take action. And since the Democrats do control the House, that's where the action has to take place. And I guess Pelosi is resigned to the probability that there will be impeachment proceedings. But she wants the perception to be that she avoided it until it became overwhelming. And again, I frankly don't see the benefit, even to Democratic constituencies and the effort to hold on to control of the House in the 2020 elections. I can't quite wrap my little brain around that. So the meeting that produced the comment that led Trump to blow up was over in the basement of the Capitol, described by Glenn Thrush of the New York Times as a hastily called but carefully choreographed meeting of the House Democratic Caucus. And when Pelosi emerged, she accused the president of engaging in a cover-up. And this is described as a way of trying to cool the growing momentum in the Democratic caucus to formally begin impeachment proceedings. And the description here is that Pelosi has charted a middle course that emphasizes exhausting all legal and legislative options before considering impeachment. And Trump has thrown down the gauntlet. Nothing will emerge from Congress. There'll be no support from him or his Republican toadies as long as he's being investigated. And so the idea that impeachment would distract from the important work in the Democratic agenda, I'm sorry, that doesn't hold water. Nothing is going to happen until Trump's ego is assuaged or he faces the music. And so you've got the refusal of McGahn to testify yesterday. There is no scheduled time for Bob Mueller to come to the Hill, take off his halo, and testify before congressional committees. And so here's the full quote from Pelosi. We do believe that it's important to follow the facts. We believe that no one is above the law, including the president, and we believe that the president is engaged in a cover-up. She said the meeting with her Democratic colleagues wasn't about persuasion. We were just exchanging information and points of view. And at one point in the meeting, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the freshman Democrat, reiterated her support for impeachment. The, quote, only thing, end quote, that gives her pause is the fact that the impeachment would die in the Senate. And as I've pointed out, that is an obvious risk. But it's also possible that impeachment investigations and evidence and testimony could lead enough Republicans, we need 20 in the Senate, to decide that Trump is a deep liability to their own political futures. And if one or two of them flip, it will give cover to the rest. Now, I don't suggest that this is easy or that it is within reach. But as I said, I don't think the Democrats have a choice here, because Trump keeps goading them, keeps stonewalling them. And here's the latest angle on that: the effort to get his tax returns and financial records. Yesterday, somebody leaked a confidential Internal Revenue Service legal memo, and it's unsigned. Rachel Maddow made a big deal about how Trump wanted the new legal counsel and the director of the IRS confirmed by the Senate even before they confirmed Bill Barr, who has protected him as Attorney General. There's no question that there's politics going on at the Treasury Department and its subsidiary, the IRS. What the memo does is bluntly contradict the claims that Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, has been making, that he can't release the returns because there is no legislative purpose for the demand. And this legal memo says, well, the law doesn't allow the Secretary to exercise discretion in disclosing the information. It directly rejects the reason Mnuchin has cited for withholding the information. So this is certainly inconvenient for Trump. And when you couple it with the federal court decision ordering his accounting firm to release information under a congressional subpoena, Trump is going to lose these legal battles, but he plans to run out the clock and aggravate the Democrats for as long as he possibly can. And this is where I see a scenario that if the House begins impeachment proceedings, even if it's just an inquiry, that they could set up an impeachment vote for the fall of 2020, say late September next year. The House votes out an indictment for impeachment. There isn't time for the Senate to hold the hearings. And that indictment hangs over Trump during the 2020 election. I see that as one way that kind of, is a hybrid between Pelosi's refusal and my belief in the inevitability and the duty of the House to impeach Trump. Now, a little daylight coming through the stone wall as Bob Barr has relented in part to the House Intelligence Committee, and there is some sort of an agreement for Adam Schiff to withhold any further enforcement action in exchange for the release of documents in 12 unidentified categories. And these documents are said to relate to the information that was used in the Mueller report related to intelligence and those types of evidence. And we don't know that for a fact, but that is the informed speculation. So that's a little bit of progress, but it's not testimony from Bob Mueller or from the key figure in the obstruction accounts, Don McGahn, the former White House counsel. And the idea that Trump can assert executive privilege, on his tax returns, that's just fantasy. And to assert executive privilege on Don McGahn's testimony that was freely given to the Mueller investigation, I don't see how you put that toothpaste back in the tube. And likewise, Mueller himself, they can claim he can't testify because of executive privilege. He gave no advice to the president that needs to be protected. He investigated the guy and wrote a report. So these are fanciful at best. But they do block any progress. They take time to litigate. And they're just hoping that some of these will land in front of a judge who's favorable to Trump. Now, over at BuzzFeed, my buddy Jason Leopold and his writing partner Anthony Cormier are trying again to establish a claim they made in an article this past January, that Michael Cohen was instructed or ordered by Trump to lie to Congress. The term they used was directed, that Trump directed him to do that. And so they are struggling now using newly released transcripts from the House Intelligence Committee, which they say appear to support their earlier reporting that the president, quote unquote, directed him to lie. And as you read through it, it still is an inference. And it's not an illogical inference. But the critical word directed is something that does not show up in the testimony, because Michael Cohen says, well, I picked up the hint from Jay Sekulow and in a meeting with the president. And this does bring Trump closer to the obstruction that Michael Cohen has pled guilty to, lying to Congress. And I've linked to this article. I encourage you to comb through it yourselves. And you will find, once again, that BuzzFeed is trying to stretch the inference to say that Cohen was directed to lie. And I sympathize for their position, but, this was the one report that drew pushback from Mueller's spokesperson, Peter Carr, saying that this was not accurate. And BuzzFeed is just persistent to the extreme, if you ask me. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Fine Americans like Andrew Rush, Aidan McAleer, Suzanne Bowen, and the incredible Faith Peoples. They each kick in up to $20 a month. You can do it too. Visit peterbcollins.com, find the menu thing, and then click on that. Click on Become a Subscriber. You're on the sign-up page, and you can choose a level of support that's comfortable for you and your budget. New annual subscribers with a mailing address here in the U.S. earn a bonus book, and currently it could be The Psychoanalysis of Donald Trump by Justin A. Frank, the Washington, D.C. psychiatrist, called Trump on the Couch, or the book with blueprints for climate change adaptation. That's called 2100, A Dystopian Utopia. I'd love to send you one of those books. Just take out a new annual subscription today, and we will take care of that for you. Remember a few weeks back, Trump kind of idly threatened to ship immigrants to sanctuary cities across the country as some form of payback to liberals? Well, it's underway. And it's interesting because this has been talked about over the last few days, but I haven't seen any national media pick up on this. First, they are airlifting migrants from Texas to San Diego. Now, San Diego has its own problems with migrants at the border there and the asylum process that backs them up. And some people go to Mexico. Some families get admitted to the United States under the catch and release rubric. But Customs and Border Protection announced on Friday they'll begin sending flights of between 120 and 135 migrants to San Diego from the Rio Grande Valley, because Border Patrol stations there are overwhelmed by the surge in migrant traffic. And here is a San Diego County Supervisor, Diane Jacob, who's not happy. Immigration is clearly the responsibility of the federal government, but now it's sticking San Diego County with the bill. Since the opening of an emergency shelter downtown in October, the county has had to spend nearly $2 million to screen and process some 14,000 asylum seekers. Local taxpayers should not be on the hook for this. Another supervisor, Nathan Fletcher, said Trump has manufactured this immigration crisis to drive his political agenda. His inability to lead has put undue burden on local communities. So ICE is operating these flights, and they are also using Greyhound buses or just dumping people at Greyhound stations. In the last week, according to a news blog called LAist, more than 60 adults and children have been dropped off at the Greyhound bus station in San Bernardino. San Bernardino, by the way, is a city and a county. And they drop them off without an ongoing ticket to some other destination and without any money. They just leave them there. And because families that include children can't be detained for more than 20 days, ICE is using this crude tactic as payback to communities that Trump perceives as liberal and as oppositional to his immigration policies, such as they are. And this is an ugly process. Now, I don't object to bringing immigrants into the interior of the country, but it should be done in an orderly, a planned way, a humane way, and not treat them as baggage, just to be dropped off and, you're on your own. And also, we must denounce the political payback element that appears to be central to this so-called policy. Yesterday, I led the podcast with my greeting, a welcome home for John Philip Walker Lind. And today, the New York Times, in a very uneven article under the byline of Carol Rosenberg, warned Americans that Lind is about to be released from the federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. It's scheduled to happen tomorrow, and I hope it does, but I am prepared for interference by Trump or some of his low-life operatives. And the New York Times recites some of the same history of John Lind's capture in Afghanistan in the fall of 2001. And Carol Rosenberg tries to be even-handed. She's a great reporter who's done excellent coverage of Guantanamo when she worked for the Miami Herald. Here's a quote. "The government has characterized Lind in recent years as holding on to extremist views, and his release has now brought objections from the family of Mike Spann, the CIA officer who died in proximity to Lind, but the family claims that Lind has some responsibility are gross exaggerations that are not based on any evidence." And the article does note that there is no evidence of any complicity by John Lind in the death of Mike Spann. And they go through the issue of, here's an interesting comment. As an American citizen, he was tried in federal court, unlike citizens of other countries who were also picked up in Afghanistan and Pakistan, but who ended up in the military prison at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And later, Rosenberg acknowledges in this article that his 17 years behind bars is much longer than most of the men, 158 foreign prisoners who were captured in similar circumstances and who were repatriated without charges long before John Lind had any idea that he would be released, or at least before his scheduled release is coming up. And so, once again, we're seeing leaked information from the Federal Bureau of Prisons, quoted by the New York Times and the Washington Post, suggesting that John Lind is still a terrorist threat. He remains a devout Muslim, and the only controversy that surfaced while he was in federal prison was he joined a lawsuit to require the allowance of he and other Muslims to observe their prayer rituals. And so I'm sad to see the corporate media taking essentially stenographic handouts of leaked attacks on John Lind. And let me say that I have no information about his state of mind, about his political beliefs, about his ongoing commitment to so-called jihad. But I'm quite doubtful and very suspicious of these opportunist leaks that are surfacing right now in an effort to prevent him from being released tomorrow. I want to recommend two commentaries, one today at Mint Press News under the byline of Miko Peled. I interviewed Mr. Peled a few years back. You could find it if you search his name at peterbcollins.com. He is the son of an Israeli general, and he is a critic of the Zionist extremist government of Benjamin Netanyahu. And today he takes on a plea deal that is giving easy treatment to Israeli settlers who are charged with the arson murder of the Dawabsha family in July of 2015. The suspects are accused of firebombing the home where a man, his wife, and their 18-month-old son were killed in the firebombing, and their older son, who was 4 at the time, was the only survivor, and he sustained severe burns on 60% of his body. The two suspects are named Amiram Ben Uliel and Alicia Otis. They're part of a violent gang that goes by the name of the Hills Youth. And Otis was released to house arrest, and the murder charges against him were dropped. His identity had been kept hidden well into the trial process. And Peled compares it to the easy treatment that was given to Elor Azaria, the Israeli soldier who executed a wounded man while video cameras were rolling, and only because of that video was he nominally held accountable. But he was treated by many Jews as a hero. So Peled also notes the Israeli High Court has ruled that torture is illegal. The only exclusion is if they have a ticking time bomb case. And he says that when the Israelis are interrogating Palestinians, there's always a bomb ticking, but not so with Israelis. And one of these suspects had the charges dismissed because he was tortured by interrogators when there was no ticking bomb. Now, I don't support torture in any interrogation, but Peled is correct in noting the disparity in the treatment of Jews and Palestinians. And we haven't seen a case where a Palestinian had charges dismissed or evidence suppressed because they were tortured by Israelis. The other commentary surprised me. It's at BuzzFeed under the byline of Jewish or Israeli American, let me correct that, Israeli American journalist Myrav Zansin. And she writes that she is a liberal Israeli. She has endured the slings and arrows and the slurs because of her political views. And instead of calling her anti-Semitic, in Israel, dissenters are declared traitors, Arab lovers, or foreign agents. And she said that this, of course, has nothing to do with the welfare of the Jewish people or Israel's future, and everything to do with controlling the discourse, a telltale feature of illiberal regimes. The objective is to silence and discredit marginal voices and shut down debate. And that's what's happening, she says, to Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, the two Palestinian American and Muslim members. Tlaib is Palestinian and Omar is Somali, but they are both Muslims. And so she makes some, I think, good comments. She says, this is why Trump, with Netanyahu's blessing and backup from Jared Kushner and other senior Jewish officials in the administration, consistently lobs asinine accusations of anti-Semitism against his opponents, and can get away with calling the Democratic Party anti-Semitic, even as he himself normalizes white supremacists and employs anti-Semitic dog whistles. So there's some good comments in this piece, and I recommend it to your own personal reading pile. New information coming from Syria, being investigated by the United States, a claim that the Assad government has used a chemical weapon in one of the final rebel-held pockets of the country in Idlib province. And like all others, I say bring on the evidence, and if there's proof, I'll accept it. But we have seen false accusations of chemical weapons attacks by the Assad regime in previous occasions. We were just talking about Duma yesterday. And there has been the publication, the New York Times serialized it last week, of a report based on information that has been captured related to the Assad government's torture and murder of dissenters in the ugly prisons in Syria. Now, I want to be very clear that in calling for honest investigations of the previous claims of chemical weapons use, I've never been an apologist for Assad, and I do not diminish the brutality of his government and the ugly way they have conducted the civil war there. The Trump administration may inadvertently be addressing massive human rights abuses in China, the mass detention and surveillance of the Uyghur population, the mostly Muslim ethnic minority. And the numbers are as many as 800,000 to 3 million Uyghurs may be under either forced detention in these camps or under electronic surveillance. And one of the companies that enables that is a Chinese firm called Hikvision, H-I-K Vision, and the Trump administration is considering putting sanctions on that company. Now, this would be the first time that Trump has even stood up nominally for the rights of Uyghurs in China. But to me, it appears to be more connected with the ongoing trade war, and that this is simply a convenient way to tweak the Chinese from a different angle. And finally today, two stories related to San Francisco. The controversy continues over the police raid on a journalist's home. They were seeking information on who leaked a police report to him about the circumstances of the recent death of our public defender, Jeff Adachi. And the police chief, Bill Scott, made it worse yesterday because he inferred that the reporter had engaged in criminal behavior. He says, "We believe that a police department employee was a part of this. We believe that in order for this to be successfully pulled off, there had to be some contact between the employee and the reporter, Mr. Carmody. We believe he was part of the effort to illegally obtain this report." Now, this parallels the treatment of Julian Assange and the claim in the single charge of his indictment by the U.S. that he helped Chelsea Manning break into protected American computer systems. Well, that remains to be proven. But we know that receiving this information by a reporter is not a crime, and it is protected by California's SHIELD law. So yesterday, a judge ordered the police to return all of the materials, hard drives, and other equipment that they took from the reporter, Mr. Carmody. But they didn't expose the underlying information behind the warrants that were issued, and the controversy will continue. And maybe someday this will be up before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the once uber-liberal bank of the appeals court system in this country. But the brazen court packing by Trump and his allies continues as a man named Daniel Collins, no relation to yours truly, was confirmed to the Ninth Circuit yesterday in a party line vote in the Senate. And this is a guy who clerked for Antonin Scalia. He joined the arguments supporting the right of corporations to exercise religious beliefs by denying contraceptive coverage to female employees. He has previously represented the tobacco giant Philip Morris, and he was the legal representative for the company called Jeppesen Aviation that was hired by the CIA to transport prisoners during the rendition program. So this guy is a made man in the corporate and deep state, and he was rammed onto the court in a lifetime appointment. And I'm just scanning here to see if they cite his age. It doesn't say, but he appears to be younger than 60, so he'll be on the court ruling from the right for a long, long time to come. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it everywhere. You'll find it on YouTube And I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.